You know how everybody always says they want to learn from the greats, to sit at the feet of the masters? Well, today's deep dive takes us right into one of those moments. It's sort of like a masterclass on life and faith with Jesus himself.
And it happens during a surprisingly low-key period. The months
Hmm.
between Jesus starting his ministry and the events leading up to his crucifixion. It's September, and tensions are sky high in Judea and Galilee. John the Baptist is imprisoned by Herod Antipas.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, paint that picture for me a little bit. Why was John in prison? What was Herod so worried about?
Well, Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, was a complex figure, to say the least. He was caught between maintaining Roman favor and placating his Jewish subjects. John, outspoken and uncompromising, publicly condemned Herod's marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias. This wasn't just a personal slight, though. It was a direct challenge to Herod's authority, both religiously and politically.
So John ends up in prison, and Jesus, knowing all of this, decides to lead his apostles on a retreat to Mount Gilboa. But it's not just a relaxing getaway, right? This is strategic.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
That's
a
okay.
deliberate move on Jesus' part, and it's fascinating to unpack why. He has three main goals for this retreat, and they're all interconnected.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
First, he needed to solidify his apostles' understanding of his teachings. Now, these were devoted followers, but they weren't always on the same page,
Right.
Think about it. They came from different walks of life. They had different personalities, and their interpretations of Jesus' message, especially the idea of the kingdom, were pretty varied.
Yeah, that's something I can relate to. Even today, within any group of friends, you're going to have different perspectives on just about everything.
Precisely. Imagine the dinner table conversations at that retreat.
Mhm.
We know, for example, that Andrew and John were convinced the kingdom had already arrived, while Peter and James were certain it was still to come. Can you imagine the debates?
Oh, I can practically hear it now. But disagreements aside, they were all drawn to Jesus and his message. It really makes you wonder what it would have been like to be a fly on the wall during those teachings.
Well, and that's where the second reason for the retreat comes into play. The political climate was volatile. Staying put in Judea or Galilee with all eyes watching wasn't the wisest move. Tensions were running high after John's arrest, and Jesus knew that open conflict at that point wouldn't help anyone.
So lay low, let things cool off a bit. Makes sense. Okay, that's two reasons. What's the third?
Waiting and seeing what would happen with John the Baptist. His imprisonment was a huge wild card. It could have sparked an uprising, or led to a harsher crackdown by Herod, or taken any number of unpredictable turns.
Talk about a tense waiting game. So Jesus uses this retreat to teach, to regroup, and to strategize. It's incredible to think that this quieter, less talked about period was so pivotal.
Absolutely. This retreat wasn't just about avoiding trouble. It was about preparation, about laying the groundwork for a movement that was about to change the world.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because amidst all this strategizing and waiting, Jesus drops this bombshell teaching on prayer. And it's not what you might expect.
You're right. This wasn't about rote prayers or going through the motions. This was about something much deeper, what he called communion of sonship.
Communion of sonship. Now that's an interesting phrase. What does that even mean?
It's about understanding our relationship with God as deeply personal and intimate, like a child with a loving parent, and that this relationship should be reflected in how we pray. Jesus wanted to move his followers away from formal ritualistic prayer and toward a more heartfelt, spontaneous connection with the divine.
So it's not about saying the right words, but about having the right heart.
Exactly. He was challenging centuries of tradition, urging his followers to move beyond empty gestures and connect with God from a place of genuine love and trust. And he used stories to illustrate this point beautifully.
Oh, tell me you're going to talk about the story of the persistent neighbor. It's one of my favorites. There's something so relatable about someone banging on your door at midnight, needing bread. It's happened to all of us, right?
Perhaps not at midnight, but we've all been in situations where we desperately needed something.
Right.
And that's precisely the point Jesus was making. He told that story to illustrate the importance of persistence, sincerity, and unwavering faith in prayer.
And it's not about wearing God down, right? It's about that unwavering faith that, as you said, reflects a deep trust in a loving parent.
Yes, it's about aligning our will with God's will, not about bending his will to ours.
Okay, so we've got these apostles up on Mount Gilboa, completely immersed in these profound teachings on prayer. And they're blown away, right? They realize they need a way to share this revolutionary idea with others.
Yeah, absolutely. They wanted something tangible, a model for their own prayer life and something they could easily pass on to new believers.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like, how do you bottle this lightning in a jar, this revolutionary way of talking to God?
Exactly. And it's interesting you mentioned bottling lightning because Jesus wasn't just bucking a trend. He was turning centuries of tradition on its head. Back then, even John the Baptist had specific prayers he taught his followers. It was the norm.
So what did they do? Did Jesus just say, here's a prayer, memorize this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember how we talked about the apostles coming from different backgrounds? It turns out the prayer that we know today as the Lord's Prayer wasn't something brand new that Jesus came up with just for them.
Wait, seriously? I always assumed Jesus taught them the Lord's Prayer for the first time up on that mountain.
And that's what most people think. It's understandable. But the Lord's Prayer actually has a history, a fascinating one at that. It was something Jesus had taught his family years earlier, back in Nazareth.
No way. You're blowing my mind here. So the Lord's Prayer wasn't just for the apostles, it was for everyone.
Precisely. It's a powerful reminder that spiritual practices, even ones as significant as this prayer, have origins, contexts, and evolutions.
Okay, I need to sit with that for a second. We're talking about the Lord's Prayer, the prayer being shared in a family setting years before Jesus even began his public ministry. That changes things. It makes it so much more intimate somehow.
That's a great word for it, intimate. And it challenges us to think about the Lord's Prayer not just as a liturgical text, but as a deeply personal expression of our relationship with God.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about the what and the why of Jesus's teachings on prayer, but there's also the how. And this is where I'm reminded of something that seems kind of contradictory. We know that Peter, James, and John often accompanied Jesus during his nighttime prayers, but they rarely heard him speak. What's up with that?
That's a great observation. And it points to another crucial aspect of Jesus' prayer life that he modeled for his disciples: silent prayer. He often prayed silently in his heart, not for show or for anyone else to hear.
So it's okay if my mind wanders when I pray. I'll admit it, I've always felt guilty about that.
It's not about emptying your mind, but focusing your intention, your heart. It's about that communion of sonship we were talking about earlier, that deep personal connection with God that transcends words.
Okay, that actually takes the pressure off. But wait, there's more to this prayer thing, right? Jesus shared additional prayers, prayers not meant for the public. What was that about?
Yes. And this is where things take a truly fascinating turn. According to some accounts, the source of these prayers was other inhabited planets.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Other planets? You're saying Jesus taught extraterrestrial prayers. I've never heard this before.
It definitely sounds incredible. These cosmic prayers weren't widely shared until the 20th century with the publication of the Urantia Book.
The Urantia Book, okay. Refresh my memory on that one.
Right. So the Urantia Book is a complex and controversial text that claims to reveal new spiritual truths. And while we might not fully understand the origins or purpose of these cosmic prayers described within it, they do offer a mind-blowing glimpse into the vastness of creation and the universality of prayer.
Extraterrestrial prayers.
Yes.
It's almost too much to get my head around. Okay. I need a minute to process this. But before we get too lost in space, let's bring it back down to Earth. Remember John's apostles? They were going through their own journey, trying to make sense of their leader's imprisonment and the rise of this new movement led by Jesus.
Absolutely. While Jesus and his apostles were having this intense spiritual retreat, John's apostles were grappling with all sorts of questions and anxieties. It's easy to imagine them feeling a little lost and uncertain about the future.
And then they show up at the Gilboa camp. Talk about a collision of worlds.
It really was. You have these two groups, both devoted to their respective leaders, both trying to navigate a very volatile and uncertain time.
So how did it go when John's apostles met Jesus and his apostles? Was it awkward? Did they all get along?
I doubt it was a totally seamless transition. It probably involved some awkward moments and some pretty intense discussions. They had disagreements, differing interpretations of events. They faced challenges in trying to unify their messages.
It's easy to forget. Even with divine guidance, building a movement is messy. So how did they eventually find common ground? What were some of the key decisions they made during this time?
Well, adopting the Lord's Prayer was a major step.
Of course, it's a prayer for everyone, right?
Yeah.
It's brilliant when you think about it. Common ground through shared prayer. What else?
They decided to continue their work separately, but collaboratively. They recognized the need to maintain their unique identities while still working towards a common goal.
Working smarter, not harder. Did they come to an agreement about anything else?
Yes. Baptism was a big one. They ultimately decided that out of respect for John, as long as he was alive, his apostles would handle the baptisms, and Jesus' apostles would provide the primary instruction for new believers.
So, respecting existing structures while incorporating new teachings, it was a compromise, but a really strategic one.
Exactly. This period was about so much more than just Jesus teaching. It was about him leading, guiding, adapting, and shaping the future of his movement, even while facing extremely challenging circumstances.
Okay, so you've got this fascinating mix of collaboration and compromise happening at Gilboa, and then things take another turn, right? Jesus and his followers head to the Decapolis, a region with 10 Greek cities. Tell me more about that.
The Decapolis mission was huge. It marked a significant shift in strategy. Up until this point, Jesus had been focused primarily on Jewish communities. But the Decapolis was different. This was about reaching beyond traditional Jewish audiences, engaging with different cultures and beliefs.
So stepping out of their comfort zone and into unknown territory, it sounds risky.
Absolutely. But it was calculated risk, and it speaks to Jesus' growing confidence in his message and his mission.
What were they doing in the Decapolis for those 2 months?
It was a time of intense teaching, healing, and connecting with people from all walks of life. But it was also a time of strategizing and consolidating their message. Remember, this was the end of simply absorbing John's followers. They were forging their own path, developing their own identity.
Wow, you can almost feel the momentum building. Okay, so back to John the Baptist. Still in prison, still waiting for something. And then he sends messengers to Jesus with this incredibly loaded question. Are you the one, or should we look for another? Talk about a tense moment.
It's a question that's puzzled theologians and scholars for centuries. It's easy to read it as doubt, but I think it's more nuanced than that.
What do you mean?
Well, John, even in his confinement, must have sensed the magnitude of what was happening with Jesus' ministry. Perhaps his question wasn't so much about his own doubt, but a way to reassure his followers amidst the uncertainty. Or maybe even a way to offer Jesus an opportunity to publicly declare his mission in a more definitive way.
Interesting. So how did Jesus respond to this? Did he take it personally?
Not at all. He responded with compassion and understanding, telling the messengers to go back and tell John about all they had witnessed. The blinds receive their sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor.
Wow. That's not just an answer, it's a powerful affirmation of his mission.
Exactly. And it speaks to the deep respect and love that Jesus had for John. He understood the burden John carried and the difficult circumstances he was facing.
And John, hearing that, must have felt.
Perhaps a mixture of relief, confirmation, and maybe even a sense of peace. It's hard to know for sure. What we do know is that not long after this exchange, John the Baptist was executed.
Oh man, that's right. It's easy to forget about that part. It's such a brutal end to his story. How did Jesus react when he heard the news?
He was obviously deeply saddened. But he also recognized this tragic event as a turning point.
A turning point.
Yes, a call to action. He gathered his disciples and said, John is dead. Herod has beheaded him. Tonight go into joint council and arrange your affairs accordingly. There shall be delay no longer. The hour has come to proclaim the kingdom openly and with power. Tomorrow we go into Galilee. John's death marked the beginning of a bolder, more public sage in Jesus' ministry.
So it's like everything that came before, the retreat, the teachings, the collaborations, the challenges, it was all preparation for this moment.
Exactly, and it sets the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold in the weeks and months to come.
Wow, what a story. It's like we've been on this incredible journey uncovering this hidden chapter in the life of Jesus. You know, I've heard these stories countless times, but I've never really thought about this period in such depth before.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We often focus on the more dramatic, miraculous parts of Jesus' ministry, but this period, often overlooked, reveals so much about his character, his leadership, and the strategic brilliance with which he built his movement.
Totally. It's like we've been handed this missing puzzle piece. Knowing about this retreat, those incredible teachings on prayer, the collaborations with John's apostles, and the Decapolis mission, it adds a whole new dimension, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shows us a leader who was both deeply spiritual and incredibly strategic. Someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, who knew how to build consensus, and who was willing to adapt his approach to meet the needs of the moment.
And he did all of that while navigating intense political pressure, personal loss, and the weight of his own impending mission. It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It certainly is. But it also makes him so much more relatable, don't you think? He wasn't just some distant divine figure. He was a human being facing real challenges with courage, compassion, and an unwavering faith in his purpose.
That's such a good point. It's easy to put Jesus on a pedestal and forget that he experienced the full spectrum of human emotions, including doubt, grief, and frustration. This period we've been exploring really brings that home.
It certainly does. And it makes his message of hope, love, and forgiveness all the more powerful.
You know, it makes you wonder what else we might be missing. What other hidden chapters are waiting to be discovered in the stories we think we know so well?
That's the beauty of deep dives like this. There's always more to learn, more to uncover, and every new discovery has the potential to deepen our understanding and challenge our perspectives.
So for you listening, here's something to chew on. How does knowing what we now know about this period change your perspective on the more well-known stories of Jesus' life? Does it change how you view his miracles, his teachings, his ultimate sacrifice?
It's a question worth pondering.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep diving deep.